Good morning. Today we are going to take the next step and we're going to do a valve adjustment. Very common procedure to do on all motorcycles, even cars, especially older ones. A valve adjustment is so the end of the rocker arm here is going to be pressing down on top of the valve and the valve spring. At a certain point in the rotation of the rotor here, there's going to be a time when the piston is all the way up at the top. And when that piston is at the top, both valves need to be closed. So when they're closed, there's no pressure on these rocker arms. So these rocker arms will be slightly loose. When the valve is open, that's when the cam lobe is pointing up, and that forces the rocker arm to seesaw, and it pushes down on the valve, and pushing down on the valve actually opens it, and that's letting in, if it's open on this side, it's letting in gas and air. If it's open on this side, that means the explosion just happened and it's pushing the exhaust out. When the explosion happens, both valves are tightly closed, and these will be loose and they'll make the little clicking noise. And when I say loose, I mean like, not like flopping around, but you'll be able to take it and you can shake it and like that. That's loose. So we're going to make sure that the cylinder is in the proper spot, which means both of the valves should be closed. And with both valves closed, these will be loose. And then we take the feeler gauge and we slide it between the top of the valve stem and the end of the rocker arm. There has to be a specific gap in this. There has to be a specific gap right in here. We need to measure that gap. And if it's incorrect, which it will be, we take the flathead screwdriver and we turn this rocker arm shaft until the gap is correct. And once it's correct, we tighten this nut. So this is all detailed on page 34 and 35 in the manual. You will need your feeler gauge. You will need a 14 millimeter wrench. You will need a 12 millimeter wrench, and you will need a flathead screwdriver. So I'm not going to go with a particularly large flathead. This is just a kind of a medium-sized flathead. Here's my 14. And here's my 12. So we need these 4 items. All right. So we start from page 34, where it says valve clearance. Remove all the tappet covers. That would be those circles here. Those are done. Remove the alternator cover. That's already, we have access to the alternator. We're good. Okay, use a wrench on the alternator rotor bolt. Turn the engine counterclockwise until the left cylinder intake valve opens fully, then starts to close. Continue turning the engine from this point until the LT mark on the alternator rotor aligns with this index pointer. Okay, so we're going to turn this with our 14 millimeter, and while doing that, we have to keep an eye on this valve, this rocker. So as we're turning this, we're going to see this rocker arm. The rocker arm is going to start pushing down, and as we keep turning the alternator rotor, that rocker arm is going to start pushing or letting it go and coming back up, and at some point it's going to come up all the way, and that should be where the LT mark lines up, and at that point both these rocker arms should be loose. See if I can get a good view here. All right, turning. So we can see right now that the cam lobe on the exhaust valve is coming up. So the exhaust valve is now open, and the intake valve is still totally closed. So it should still be kind of loose. It's a little bit loose. Still turning, still turning, still turning. Still kind of loose. And now I think it's about to start. Yeah, you can see that the cam lobe is starting to make its way up. The rocker arm is now seesawing, so it's this way, very tight. Can't make this thing click at all. So right now it's pushing down. It's starting to push down on that valve. And the book again says, turn it until the left cylinder intake valve opens fully, then starts to close. Continue turning until you get to the LT. So open fully means that cam lobe, the tip of that cam lobe, the top of the egg, is all the way up. So that's probably right about there. And if you look at the spring and valve inside this compared to the right side, where it's a little loose, there's a subtle difference. You can see that this spring is a little further away from the hole. It's been compressed, it's pushing down. This spring is like right at the lip of the threads right here. This one is not. I can get my finger in there further. So it's open fully right now. And if you look at the rocker arm, it's being pushed up. So now we need to continue turning until the LT mark is at this hash mark right here. And this is where it definitely does not want to stay. Like, this is that weird problem where putting it on the LT mark, if I'm holding it, great. As soon as I take the wrench off, as soon as I let go with my hand, it moves. Nothing I can do about that. So when I do my measurements, I'm gonna have to hold this with my hand the whole time. That's a pain. But there's really nothing, there's no way around that. I'm just gonna have to, so I'm gonna let it go for now. And when I get myself ready with my feeler gauges, I'm gonna have to be doing two things at once here. It is what it is. Okay, so right now, the left cylinder is at top dead center. So if you shine your flashlight into the spark plug hole, you will see the top of the cylinder. It is all the way up. You put your screwdriver in, you can touch the top of the cylinder. And you can see it. If you look on the other side, shine the light in, there's nothing. You can put your screwdriver in really far. TDC, top dead center. Very common term used in the engine world. it's, yeah, it's something that you'll hear a million times when talking to people about tuning engines and timing engines, is top dead center, TDC. Okay, so the left cylinder, TDC. Right now, both rocker arms should be loose. And, you know, remember, loose is a relative term here. The fact that it's moving even this tiny little bit means it's loose. If yours are super tight, meaning, and that will probably be the case if your cam lobes are facing up, then rotate your, and it even says this on page 35 at the top, rotate this around 360 degrees until the LT mark is back up here. And then try these again. So the LT mark matches up with the hash mark. You shine your flashlight in here and put the tip of your screwdriver in, and you should be touching the top of the piston. And these have to be loose. And strangely, this is loose right here. Now we measure the clearance between the end of the rocker arm and the top of the valve stem. And the intake, which is on the back of the engine, has a different measurement than the exhaust. Page 35, on the left cylinder, measure clearance between cam follower, that's the rocker arm, and the valve stem using a flat feeler gauge, figure 6. So right here it shows a little feeler gauge being slid in here. This is a slightly different setup. It's a slightly different engine, unfortunately. Intake valve clearance should be 0.002 inches or 0.05 millimeters. So let's do that one first. Intake 0.002. So take your feeler gauge and look for here's the millimeter, here's the inches, 0.002 or 0.05 millimeters. Right there. That was actually the third one in. Super duper flimsy. So if you have the same set of feeler gauges that I do, which it's very possible you don't, it was only the third one in. So close them up, leave only the one that you need out. 0.002, 0.05 millimeters for the intake. Double checking, intake should be, yes, all right. So what we're doing here is we're taking our feeler gauge and we are sliding it between the rocker arm and the top of the valve stem. I hope I can adequately show what's going on here, like that. Now there should be some resistance. So this is a difficult, and it takes some time and practice to figure out the exact deal here. But if it's moving this easy, the gap is probably too big. What we want is for the rocker arm to be touching the top of the feeler gauge and the top of the valve stem to be touching the bottom of the feeler gauge at the same time. So they should both be touching, and you should be able to feel that there's a little bit of resistance as you move this back and forth. If they're touching too much, if they're too close together, you won't be able to get the feeler gauge in there. If they're open too much, it'll feel like it's really easy to move things. So we're going to adjust the rocker arm shaft until the rocker arm is touching, and you'll feel them both touching at the same time as you move this back and forth. But also, the fact that I just did that while this wasn't at the LT mark was wrong. So with this at the LT mark, right there, holding it with one hand, and now trying the feeler gauge again. Huge gap. So I'm going to turn this rocker arm shaft. I'm going to loosen this nut up a little bit. And I'm going to turn this 90 degrees to the right. That's just my first guess. Let's see how that works. Making sure this is still... Okay, that's still where it needs to be now that I've adjusted it again. And I'm going to try the feeler gauge. Okay, it's still going, it still fits in there, but it's a little tighter. I think it's still too loose. I think that, yeah, there's no tension happening at all there. So I'm going to turn the rocker arm shaft again, and let's try another 90 degrees. I'm going to try loosen this nut again. I'm going to try here. Oh, it doesn't want to go all the way. So then I'm going to go back around. I'm going to try pointing to the left. So pointing the hash mark, pointing in. Let's see what that does. Make sure my LT mark is where it needs to be. It keeps moving on me. It's irritating. Ooh, that's a little better. It's a little harder to move back and forth. There's a little bit of, like, I can feel the rocker arm is touching. I think this is perfect. There's a little bit of drag. It's not super easy to move it in and out. I'm gonna go with that. Is this still where it needs to be? Yes. So on my engine, I need this hash mark pointing in. I'm gonna finger tighten this. And the thing that stinks here is when I go to tighten this for real, it's gonna wanna move this shaft. So I have to use the screwdriver and the 12 millimeter wrench at the same time. So that means holding this here and making sure the shaft does not turn. It'd be great if I just dropped everything. Making sure that the shaft does not turn, and then tightening this. After you tighten it, you need to double check it again. So 14 millimeter on the rotor, put the LT mark where it needs to be, and slide the feeler gauge in there. This thing keeps moving on me. And it's making a noise because it's getting touched by both sides at the same time. That's pretty good. I like it. Okay. I am done with the exhaust valve, the intake valve. Now I need to do the exhaust valve. Let's see what it says about that. The exhaust valve clearance should be 0.004 or 0.1 millimeters. Let's find that. Okay, right there. So fold the rest of them back down and in, and leave only 0.004, 0.1 millimeter. All right, same routine. 14 millimeter on the alternator, LT mark there. It slides in and out way too easy. So this nut is loose. I'm going to turn this so that the hash mark is pointing in, just like on the other side, because I got lucky that way. Let's see if I get lucky twice. LT mark, still good. Feeler gauge. That's a little too tight. Just a tiny bit too tight. So I'm going to go a little bit less than, so instead of 90 degrees to the right, remember it was facing straight up, now it's pointing to the right. I'm going to go at a 45 degree angle. So I went in between where it was and where it was. Oh yeah, that's better. Maybe I should drop things more often. Killing me. That actually might be a little loose. So I'm going to go closer to 90 degrees to the right. Still a little loose. I'm going to go back to 90 degrees, all the way 90 degrees to the right. So the hash mark right there, pointing to the right. LT mark, I have to fight with that every 5 seconds. Yeah, that's a little tiny bit too tight. So I'm going to just give it a hair. That's it. You could barely even see that I turned it. LT mark, killing me. I like it. Definitely can feel it touching both sides at the same time. So now I need to tighten this nut without moving the rocker arm shaft. So I'm going to take my 14 millimeter off of the rotor. I'm going to hold this where it needs to be. Don't let that shaft turn while I tighten this nut. It's wanting to turn. the 14 back on. Get the LT mark where it needs to be. And double check. Got lucky. Excellent. All right. Left side is DU when done. Now we need to do the right side. So we turn the alternator rotor bolt counterclockwise, same direction we were before, 180 degrees until the T mark on the alternator rotor aligns with this index mark, figure 8. There's figure 8 on the other page. Yes, there's the T mark. So we're no longer concerned with the LT mark. We need the T mark. So my guess, I always figured that the LT, the T means top and the L means left. So this one referred to the left top, left piston top. And now we're going to be looking at the top for the right. I don't know why it doesn't say RT, but it doesn't. So spin this guy around and T mark. The T mark kind of wants to stay. Isn't that convenient? Well, kind of. Moving a little bit. Maybe if I go a little past it, it'll slowly make its way to the mark. Does it keep moving? It does. That stinks. So if I keep the wrench on here and let it hang by itself, does that add enough weight to stop it from turning? Not really, but it helps. So it's going to be hard to do this because it's on the other side. Will it make a difference? Probably not. So I'm going to keep the wrench on here just like I was before. And yeah, it's moving. So I'm going to keep a hand on that. And I've already got my feeler gauge set for the intake. So this time I'm going to start with the intake valve. I'm going to measure the right side. Holy smokes, that's loose. Taking my hand off the wrench. Coming over to the right side. And that nut is loose. So I'm going to turn it so that the hash mark is pointing in. So the screwdriver is straight up and down. Get this on the T mark. And measure again. That's pretty darn good. First try. Okay, I'm letting go here. And I'm going to tighten this nut. Hold the shaft in place. Tightening this nut is a little difficult because your wrench hits the casing, but you'll figure it out. Okay, that nut is tight, and that's on the T mark. And last double check to make sure nothing moved. You dig it. Now we need to do the exhaust, and the exhaust we have to have a different size. We need the 0.002, 0.05. This is for the exhaust. Get the T mark where it's got to be. Hold it there. Measure. Super loose. Don't feel any tension in there whatsoever. Make sure that that nut is loose. I'm going to rotate this guy 90 degrees to the right. So the hash mark is pointing in. There's the hash mark there. Feeler gauge. Get the T mark there. Try the feeler gauge. Ooh, way too tight. Can't even get this sucker in there. So it was at 12 o'clock, now it's at 3 o'clock. So I'm gonna go halfway between 12 and 3. That's about halfway. So it's this is here, I went 90 degrees first. So now I'm gonna try 45 degrees. Get the T mark set. Man, that's crazy. That's really, really loose. Maybe we'll try going a little bit closer. I'm gonna go here. So that's almost, the screwdriver is almost straight up and down. The hash mark is almost pointing to 3 o'clock. That's like a 2:30. Check the T. And check the gap. That's better. Still a little bit loose. Man, this is going to be a very minute adjustment right here. Barely turned it. Like, you probably couldn't even see me turn it. T. I think that's it. Still feels kind of loose, but actually it feels okay. I'm gonna go with it. It's weird, the difference of a billionth of an inch of a turn makes. So it's really important that the screwdriver does not turn. The shaft stays exactly where it is. I'll lightly tighten this. Pretty tight. One last check. T. Perfect. Valve job is done. That's all we are doing today. Cool? Let me know if you got questions.